Well, let me tell you, let me quickly remind you once again to drop in your valuable feedback. So take out your phones, go to slido.com and go to the right room, select track 3, and you can give your valuable insights if you loved Sean's presentation. And do not forget to hashtag us. Let's make more noise in the social network media by hashtagging us, hashtag DOIS19. Okay, so moving on quickly to yet another segment, to yet another session. We have with us Nagaraju Kakarla, General Manager, Head of DevOps and Cloud Delivery Group from Mindtree Limited. A quick introduction about the gentleman. Nagaraju is a seasoned technology leader with 20 plus years of balanced IT experience across software design and development, solution architecture, product support, cloud, DevOps, microservices, site reliability engineering SRE, program project management, and organizational development in roles of progressively increasing responsibility. The topic for today he's going to be talking about is on key to successful implementation of DevOps. Let's give it up, ladies and gentlemen, and let's welcome Mr. Nagaraju here with us. Welcome, sir.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I keep talking to my organizers generally whenever I go to conferences. I mean, one of the, I don't want to use it as a worst slot. It's kind of unlucky to be in a slot which is just before lunch or maybe just before tea, coffee break. So I'll try to keep yourself, kind of wake up through the session next 30 minutes or so. But honestly, I don't know how much how much of the stuff that I originally had, in my slides can cover, given the fact that many of the folks like, be it Tapo, Mark, right, and all the other guys have covered since, yesterday morning. But maybe I think, we can use this time as a good recap, right, of some of the topics, and then maybe some of the other things I would, throw some light based on my experience. All right. So very quickly, this is what I had, on my agenda. Right. Quick overview of DevOps. I think this is definitely one topic we can skip safely, given that pretty much we have been covering this since yesterday morning. But definitely would like to throw some light around Agile, DevOps, and automation, the powerful triad, which we keep addressing, especially in terms of how we can actually achieve success when we say implementing DevOps for many of our customers at Mindtree, or otherwise in general too. And also some of the key stages in implementation of DevOps, right? Some of the logical steps which help us in terms of not necessarily reaching a conclusion as such. It's an ongoing journey, obviously, as many of the speakers were talking earlier. But then how we can actually take it in a structured approach, through a structured approach, so that we can actually achieve success on an ongoing basis. So definitely, we'll spend a couple of minutes there. And also in terms of, evolution of infra-end apps, whenever we talk about, implementing DevOps, like, I heard, a lot of questions outside at the booth in terms of what are some of the key things associated with DevOps. Definitely infrastructure and within infrastructure, the cloud journey, how cloud has been helping us in terms of actually implementing some of these new age practices like DevOps, microservices, going serverless, things like Docker and Kubernetes, right? So we'll spend a few minutes there. And a little bit of more focus on the container world, especially Docker and Kubernetes being the two most, the popular technologies in the space there. And honestly, there's no secret sauce there in terms of, how we implement DevOps. It's just about, kind of consolidation or maybe embracing some of the good practices rather than best practices. Again, as some of the speakers were, rightly pointing out, there's nothing like best practice or, this is the benchmark kind of stuff within DevOps. It's like, I actually liked the word that, Tapo was mentioning in the morning, like build your own DevOps. Obviously it depends on, which industry you come from, what kind of workloads you have, how critical is, it is for you to kind of do the developments at, X times a day, a week, month, or whatever it is. So we'll spend some time around that, and also in terms of how we are, implementing DevOps for some of our customers. Okay, and definitely I would like to share some references which you may like to explore further, right, in order to build your expertise. Again, just a quick 5 to 10 minutes around this. Pretty much we have seen it, we have been through it, we have been implementing, right, faced the challenges and all of that. That's how DevOps has been becoming really popular over the last few years. This is not my definition, it's just a kind of consolidation based on my understanding, right? Attending a lot of conferences, kind of implementing in different ways for different customers. And Gartner does have, a definition for DevOps. But then, at the end of it, if you look at it, it's all about people, process, and technology. It's all about the well-collaborated, environment that we need to have across the company. And if it is an enterprise, it's a different story. It's a time-taking, thing. process. Whereas if it is a startup kind of stuff, and even better, if it is a unicorn kind of environment, I mean, whatever you want to do it, just pick it and then implement it. There's nobody to ask you, as long as you deliver the product right? A little bit of light around the timeline. I was surprised, like it wasn't shared in any of the sessions. So maybe quick few minutes in terms of where all it started back in 2007, more than a decade back, when Patrick first coined the term DevOps, and then the kind of evolution through different companies across the industry, till now, where we are living in the age of all serverless. We are talking about serverless beyond cloud also. And just the session before, even Sean was covering the microservices, the kind of thrust that has been there around microservices in terms of actually, one is the speed, scale, and reducing the cost, and the other one is actually kind of empowering your own developers instead of writing the code in a legacy way. I mean, one key point he was mentioning was in terms of the anti-patterns, cloud anti-patterns. You may be migrating your workloads to cloud, but then if it is a sheer lift and shift, you may not be able to get the best out of it, right? So you got to be cloud native, right? And in order to do that, you need to embrace the technologies which actually can help you be successful, right? Being cloud native, right? One of my favorite quotes: "You build it and you run it," right? And none other than Amazon. Of course, Amazon being a behemoth, both in terms of the revenue, technology, the dollars they can spend for anything that they want to implement, and also the kind of governance they can bring in, right? And needless to say, the kind of salaries they pay. I mean, they don't care about the salaries. They want the best of the breed, the guys and engineers, right, as part of their environment. And when they actually do it, I mean, people go that extra mile. I mean, definitely it takes a lot of effort, right, in terms of embracing the new technologies, putting an additional effort, learn new things. And one thing I have been facing, one challenge I've been facing rather as a leader is in terms of bringing people out of their comfort zones. I mean, we have been used to doing things in a certain way for ages. Now suddenly if you say like we want to change this culture, it doesn't just happen overnight, or maybe just within a matter of months. But this is doable. It's a long journey, like Tapo and other speakers were talking in the morning also, but it is very much possible. Depends on which environment, what kind of company that we are in. Why it's so popular? Again, I don't think we need to spend any time on this slide. Pretty much moving away completely from waterfall kind of model. We still have scrumfall kind of models, but essentially what I'm trying to say here is the strategic shift that has happened across the industry has made DevOps even more popular in terms of embracing the newest processes. Agile DevOps and automation, right? Very powerful triad, and this is something which we keep talking about to many of our customers. Right? Of course, we have our share of challenges in the sense like we do a lot of VSM, right? If you guys attended some of the sessions where VSM was discussed in detail, the value stream management or value stream mapping, where we kind of go to customers' environments. And we do it internally also at Mindtree, by the way, where we study the overall ecosystem of the customer, or internally for that matter again, right? And then right from the tools, the kind of tech stack, right, how they're actually using the tools, are they really capitalizing on some of the intuitive features of those tools, right? And also in terms of operations, what kind of process they have, and especially if it is a financial industry, right, the kind of regulations and tons of regulations, right, for valid reasons, of course, and how we can actually embed all of these things into the process when you build the pipelines from a CI/CD perspective. And then from a culture perspective, if you really have to kind of teach people, right, this is how we should actually do the delivery. I mean, it's a time-taking process, but then we kind of give a roadmap, thinking strategically. But then at the end of 1 month, 2 months, then Pat comes the response saying like, can we actually get started with a bit of CI/CD? I mean, it's not going to help that way. If the focus is going to be only CI/CD, let's not call it DevOps. Right? It's much beyond CI/CD. Surprisingly, when I talk to many of the guys, as part of the interview process also, and people say like, hey, can you tell me about yourself? Say like, yeah, first 5, 6 years I was into development or operations, infrastructure, whatever. Then I moved to DevOps. So what do you mean by moving to DevOps? I mean, we need to have the fundamental understanding right in terms of what DevOps is, right, holistically across the board, right, to really be successful in this space. And obviously, Agile, DevOps, and automation, by the way, is an integral part of DevOps, right? Just because, we are highlighting, in fact, the industry highlights automation separately because it's that much important, even, as much as the term DevOps itself. The other one, if you haven't read, there was a recent article from Gartner in terms of what is the percentage of adoption of digital transformation across the industry. While many of the CEOs, keep talking about, we are highly successful in terms of, moving through the DevOps, digital transformation, just about 18% across the industry. That's the max, the best case scenario that the organizations have really, embraced digital transformation, right? Just because you kind of, adopted a bunch of tools, or maybe you just tweaked in, a few of your process, or maybe you reorganized your teams a little bit here and there, that doesn't necessarily mean, digital transformation. You have to think holistically. All the three levers, if you see here, from the customer perspective, business perspective, and then the overall operational excellence, not just from a developer standpoint, or operation standpoint, or your, infrastructure or middleware standpoint. It has to be holistic across the board. Only when you bring in those changes, right, across the board, addressing these three key levers, and then kind of embracing the newest processes and the technologies in order to implement those, and then to solve for these levers. And that's where we can actually say, reasonably we are towards or through digital transformation. So this was another key. This has been another key why, DevOps has been super successful, right? These are the stages I was briefly talking about. Again, this is not my slide. I just picked it from State of DevOps report, last year report, by the way. It wasn't there this year, and obviously there's no point in repeating. But very valid actually in terms of implementing. There has to be a structured approach. If you say like we'd like to implement DevOps at our organization, and surprisingly when we talk to many of the senior leaders, they don't have a clear picture in terms of okay, the industry is talking about DevOps, and then what exactly DevOps is, right? How we can actually get started. There has to be a starting point. Honestly, there's no starting point for DevOps. You already have many of the things implemented in some form or shape. It's all about tweaking those things, embracing some of the new technologies, adopting the tools, right, appropriately in order to do things better. And that's where, the first stage comes into picture in terms of normalizing the technology stack. And because of, multi-speed IT within each of the, most of the organizations, if not each, right, every group having their own leader, their own priorities, their own thinking. I mean, people go to some conferences, they feel like, oh, this is how I feel, and then this is how we'd like to implement. So little bit of, the political flavor also gets into the picture, because of which, it's not so easy. But then the key is you have to normalize the technology stack, right? I mean, if not across the enterprise or across the company, right? Say, for example, if IT is divided into 4 or 5 groups, it has to start somewhere with one group. There would be some, really, crazy souls, crazy in the sense like who definitely want to do it in line with some of the best of the breed companies across the industry. And that's where, it has to get started by, kind of normalizing the tech stack, rationalizing the tools, tweaking the process a little bit, show the way to the rest of the groups. This is what, we can actually do by doing things this way. And then the second one is standardizing and reducing variability. Pretty much I covered, just covered. That leads to expanding the DevOps practices. That's where you have to show, right, lead the way to the rest of the groups. That's when, you can actually create that momentum. Without that, you can't really, get it across the company. There's no way, right? Automating infrastructure delivery. I mean, gone are the days, in fact, many of us can connect with the process where you used to create a demand request, and then it would go through multiple, levels of approvals, and then it would take, a few weeks before you actually get the bare metal box, and then there would be a separate team, doing all the installations. Then for the middleware, other tech stack tools, there would be different middleware team. And finally, by the time developer gets it, to actually work on the box, it would be like, I mean, in today's terminology, if you have to talk it like, 3 or 4 sprints would be over, right? Those days are gone. So definitely we have to focus on automating infrastructure delivery. There are tons of tools, very popular tools, right from Chef, Ansible, Puppet, now Terraform, which is even popular, right? Especially when with talk of cloud. I mean, we have to embrace some of these tools, and definitely one of those tools must be there in pretty much every environment. And how we can actually use those tools, not just for configuration management, but also to kind of move towards practices like infrastructure as code. That is definitely going to help, right? Last but not the least, providing self-service capabilities, right? Say, for example, one very common example which all of us are aware of, right? As a developer, if I want a new environment, or as a QA guy, right? I'm like, having enough people, but we are, lagging behind, with respect to the timelines. I want an additional environment to do the, testing real quick, right? To provision a new environment, right? Again, it's a challenge. And then even if the existing environment is, I mean, if you have an environment, multiple environments, but if there are issues, right, we kind of run into issues, and then it takes time. So how to kind of, provide the self-service capabilities, right? Especially if you practice, things like infra as code, right? Automating the infrastructure delivery. Give the self-service capability to the guys who can actually spin up the servers. But very, very important, especially talking about cloud. One of the anti-patterns, by the way, Sean was highlighting in the previous session. I mean, it would be catastrophic, right, if you leave it to the developers without having right governance, not just developers, anybody for that matter, whoever uses the cloud environment, where they kind of, spin up, some configuration level, servers or services, and then leave it there after, even after, their work is done, right? It would, actually cost a lot of dollars to the enterprise, and then when you compare between, what would be the cost, in the previous scenario where you were like on-premise and then moving to cloud. I'm kind of generalizing, but it's one of the best practices which is very, very important when we talk about providing self-service capability. I'll just move on in the interest of time. Security, again, in fact, of late, DevSecOps has been, picking up real momentum. And again, security is no, separate actually. It has always been there. It's just that, the momentum wasn't there in terms of actually embedding security into the pipelines, which is what is gaining momentum. And some of the unicorns, they're already doing it. I mean, they're leading the way, right? One of my favorites, by the way, is Netflix. I mean, I'm sure some of you must be aware of it, right? They have this, concept of chaos monkey, whereby they actually bring down the servers purposefully to understand what would be the impact on the rest of the service. I mean, if some servers go down, right, what is the maximum number of servers that I can afford to go down, right, still make sure my service is not impacted for the users, right? Using some of those practices, and as part of that, they do a lot of security testing actually, right? That's where DevSecOps is, gaining real momentum, and some of the things, right? And by the way, you can actually refer to devsecops.org and go in detail, over each of these, important factors in terms of how it is evolving, right, to be part of the mainstream DevOps pipeline. We'll not spend too much of time, but four key things. Again, the deployment frequency, lead time for changes, MTTR, time to restore your service, and then the change failure rate. Astonishingly, if you see the last line, the last box, 40 to 60% of failures across the industry are attributed to changes, some kind of changes. It could be code changes, it could be infra changes. Even if applications are available, it's not reliable, right? The users are not able to get the right service, so on and so forth. And many of those are attributed to change failure rates. How we can actually bring down the change failure rate? The moment you address the other three factors in terms of reducing the deployment frequency and the actual lead time that is required within, say, for example, deployment frequency, if you're doing, say, 1 month releases earlier. Again, I'm not generalizing, depends from industry to industry and the kind of workloads that you have. You may not have to do 1 hour deployments for every other application that we have, but as appropriate, right, it's very, very important that we understand the times that are required, and then within that have some benchmark and then move from there, right? That's how we can actually improve, right? And the industry, this was like last year's report. This year, if you see, the high performers and the elite performers itself, they take almost like 50% of the top of the stack actually, right? So it's evolving so rapidly, right? And it's high time that we embrace some of these, good practices to actually, move the needle. It's more about microservices, and the other one I'll kind of, club these things together in the interest of time before I run out of some of the things later. So microservices, and the other one which is really picking up momentum, at least, we work with 10 to 15 customers who have already embraced this one in some form or shape, and then really, going full throttle right now, the product-based operating model. I think in the morning, Gopi was kind of highlighting this, how Microsoft does it, the feature-based teams, right? So that is a step further, right, within the product-based teams. So we are talking about product-based operating model here, where you have the developers, you have the QA guys, ops, infrastructure, everything, all the guys put together and owning a product. And then Microsoft goes a step further, and then they actually have feature-based teams, right? And unlike, the product-based team, right, which is like, it's really awesome. Especially when you look at it in terms of implementation and the benefits they're actually able to, reap out of the process by implementing it, following these kind of newest practices is really awesome, right? It's worth exploring. I mean, you can just Google it and see, right, exactly how, the product-based operating model works. It's not just from, the delivery pipeline perspective, but in terms of the overall quality, how they kind of, embed security, right, within the product, and then the whole team owning it himself. Beyond the team, there's nothing. If there is an infrastructure issue, they don't go outside of the team. They don't depend on, the infra ops or the cloud ops guys, right? It's a completely self-sufficient team, because of which, you can address the key factors of, your speed, scale, and agility, and of course the cost also, obviously, right? When you address it the way, right, that it is addressed, right? And the intent is definitely met. Let me actually go back. One classic case. This is all about, I'll kind of highlight it in the next slide. Yeah. one of the classic cases, how Uber did it actually, is I'm referring to something that was 3 to 4 years back, not now, right? Moving away completely from a monolithic, big monolithic here, this side, having a bunch of adapters, and then everything gets across everything, right? And it's like this is something which all of us are aware. I mean, for ages we've been working on these legacy systems, right? And where there is a high interdependency, and then you never know, especially with many of the folks that may not be part of the organization, and then if you have to change something, right? It would be highly difficult, and then the change failure rate, MTTR, and all of those key metrics go for a toss, right? Thus where these guys have moved out completely into, and by the way, the Uber is not the only one. Many of the unicorns have actually adopted this model. In fact, it's being adopted within large enterprises also, like Amazon's, Microsoft's of the world, and all these guys. So this is high time that at least for the greenfield implementations, we start thinking about implementing microservices with a cloud native, approach to delivery. Where you have a well-defined API boundaries, and the API gateway, by the way, that's another thing Sean was highlighting in the previous session, that you need to have API gateways, at least product which we have different products which are kind of split into microservices, right? You should have separate API gateways, because behind the scenes you may have a well-defined microservices architecture, but then if it is not managed well at the API gateway level, it's not going to give you the right benefits, intended benefits, right? Those are some of the things we need to keep in mind, and the API calls should be primarily the facilitators, just to call the microservices. For example, in order to execute a particular function, if you have to call multiple microservices, your API should be helping that, and there shouldn't be direct calls between those microservices. So basically, loose coupling is what I'm referring to, which is what we've been hearing through multiple sessions since yesterday. In terms of adoption, again, it's kind of mixed actually. Only about 1/4 of the industry, has kind of adopted this. It's still evolving, I would say. But then wherever they have, adopted, it's like, big bang kind of stuff, especially for the greenfield implementations. Right? It may not make sense for legacy applications in every case, but we can certainly do. It takes a lot of effort though, right? I'll just pause here. Any questions or clarifications? Or we can take the questions towards it? Oh, okay, sure. All right. How much more time? Okay. The product IT operating model, maybe quickly I'll skip it. The 12-fact trap, this is something, I think in one of the sessions actually it was highlighted in the previous session. Ayman was highlighting. Maybe you can just go through online. It's a fantastic way of designing your applications, especially the greenfield implementations. Right? Considering your lean, it should be in a collaborative way, and then loose coupling, right? Scaling, everything put together. I mean, you talk about everything, including your disposability, right? Concurrency, port binding, right? All of those things, including admin process, by the way, very well structured. That's how we should be designing the greenfield implementation, the new applications, and then of course embracing the new the technologies like Docker and Kubernetes. Docker basically to spin up your application as containers, and then Kubernetes to manage the whole platform as an orchestration platform. Docker Swarm is there, but for whatsoever reason, because Kubernetes is so popular, and then because of the open source support, more open source support that we get for Kubernetes, and obviously I'm a fan of Kubernetes myself personally, honestly, if you ask me. I had a few slides around especially for the benefit of those who may not have worked on Docker and Kubernetes, but maybe in the interest of time, we may have to skip it. I'll share I'm sure the slides would be shared with you guys, so you can go through. And what kind of benefits we get by using containers over, virtual machines. But it's nothing like, virtual machines versus containers, right? There's a complementary, architecture. In fact, most of the cases, if you see, we are actually running containers on VMs, right? It's a complementary architecture. While we do talk about the benefits we get, right, from containers over VMs, right? It's like, they go hand in hand. Even within cloud also, I mean, well, definitely there are cloud native services like, AKS, EKS, GKE, et cetera, in different, public cloud environments. We still, embrace that complementary architecture, VMs plus, Dockers. Many terms again, with respect to Docker in terms of engine hub, the DTR, the machine, all of those things you can just, explore it. I'll be sharing it with you. And nothing new, honestly. I just picked it from Docker site, if you ask me. I just wanted to, throw some light around it, because oftentimes, especially when I talk to candidates through interviews, not just for the sake of interviews, they don't have a clarity around what are the different terminologies associated with Docker, except knowing the basics. But definitely, if you haven't worked on Docker so far, it's high time that explore it. And by the way, I'm not advocating for Docker, but it's a technology which helps us, especially from a microservices implementation perspective, along with Kubernetes. So you can explore. Also in terms of, the overall Docker architecture, how does it work all the way from, picking the code, creating an image, creating binaries, and then using the binaries to, along with the base image to create your image, dump in a registry, and then use that particular image to spin up the container, and how to manage those containers, right? And again, you can use Docker Swarm also to manage the containers, provided it's a limited in number, but if you have to, go really scalable into a scalable model, Kubernetes definitely is a way. And of course, there are other options also, outside of Kubernetes, like OpenShift, PCF is there, then many of the cloud native services, so on and so forth. Some of the triggers, again, I'd be sharing, these slides with you, right? App modernization, basically moving from legacy to microservices, implementing that loose coupling, right? These things you can, explore further. I won't be able to spend time around this. I just wanted to, kind of highlight in terms of the overall Kubernetes architecture, and then within that, how the different elements of Kubernetes, right, from control layer, your API, server, the scheduler, and then different types of kubelets, and then within the nodes are nothing but the VMs, right? And then within the nodes, there are logical structures like pods, which may have one or more, containers, right? And one particular service may be, running around. Running across multiple containers, in which case you need some service mesh like Istio, which would help us in terms of routing the calls appropriately and all of those things. And then of course some of the cloud native Kubernetes services, which I was kind of alluding to earlier. Okay. I'll just skip some of these slides, guys, again in the interest of time. Pretty much I think we spoke about these things. Yeah, so just skip it. Again, this is more of a consolidation of tools which we spoke of, in step 1 earlier, right? I mean, there are tons of tools, but then we need to know what really makes, sense for our environments, actually keeping the tech stack and all those things fine. Okay? I'll just take 2 minutes and just finish it, and I'm pretty much done, right? So, I mean, going back to the title of my presentation, by the way, right, and key to implementation of successful implementation of DevOps. At least just to quickly allude to some of the facts, in terms of how we do it at Mindtree. The VSM thing that I was talking about earlier in terms of doing that assessment of end-to-end ecosystem of our customers, and we did it for some of our internal projects also, right? So we measure it on some of the key factors, right? And then through some of the key things which we would be implementing as part of the journey in order to achieve something. And obviously, this is important. The right side is very, very important in terms of what you'd like to achieve both for the business, the customers, and then for your developers, internally, right? And all those things are different. Some are quantifiable, some are quality metrics. Again, both are equally important. Of course, the benefits we've been talking about it this morning. I just skip it. Just a sample pipeline. Take 1 minute around this. Let me actually flash the entire pipeline. Yeah. So the way we do it is, again, there's nothing like, this is the way it has to go. I mean, considering some of the many common tech stacks, like, Java, your .NET, right, and then Node.js for some of the Angular applications also, right, and considering that I just consolidated multiple pipelines into this one. So the key here is 3 key things. One is bringing the governance, right, to the left side, which is what we call as shift left, right? Right from writing your unit test cases by the developers, themselves, and then doing the unit testing even before the code is checked into source code repository, and then picking the source code, code from source code repository automatically. I mean, having automated build pipelines. And again, it's appropriate. Sometimes you may have nightly builds, and sometimes you may have to do it manually. But the key here is, in terms of ensuring the quality is built into the system right from the beginning, not at the later stages alone, right? And then, of course, using a bunch of tools to different stages, right? In source code management, then you have a bunch of build tools like Maven, Gradle, Ant, etc. Then whatever CI tools, the continuous integration tools like Jenkins, it could be Bamboo, Circle CI, Team CI, and all of those things using, and then a bunch of other security testing tools, which is what I was referring to earlier. Some of the database testing tools, so on and so forth. Use an Artifactory and then deploy. That's all. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's pretty much, guys. Unfortunately, I had a Kubernetes demo, small Kubernetes demo using AKS, but given that, we actually did a similar demo in one of the sessions yesterday, I just, skip it. Yeah. That's pretty much. Thank you, guys. Yeah. There's some
Thank you so much,
I'll
sir.
share
We
it with
request
you guys.
Mark to kindly join us on stage to hand over the certificate and memento to the gentleman, please.
Nice to get it from one of my favorite leaders.
Thank you so much
Thanks,
for being
Mark.
a part of DOS 19 and
Yeah,
enriching
thank
your knowledge towards this, sir. Let's give it up, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank
nice
you.
meeting
Thank
you
you, Mark.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very
ladies
nice
and
to hear
gentlemen,
from
we
you.
quickly give you a 5-minute coffee tea break. We request all of you to take in your coffees and teas and then walk up to the main hall as we're going to be opening up all the tracks. And we will meet you in exactly 5 minutes at the main hall as we're going to be having the keynote session by Sanjeev Sharma in 5 minutes from now. Thank you.